let's proceed further in terms of understanding the important aspect of Excel, that is nothing but formulas. Now, everyone knows that Excel is very popular in terms of doing quick calculations and complicated calculations very easily, and it consumes very less time and gives a more efficient result for the outcome. So let's try to see that how does that helps for us. The formulas which are there. So first of all, there are two things kept in mind when calculations in Excel are done. The very first thing which we can consider is something called as functions, and the another thing which we can consider is something called as formulas. Now people think that functions and formulas is something which is same, but there is a slight or thin line difference between both of them. So as we know that there is something called as functions. Now what is the meaning of functions? Now when I talk upon function is, it's functioning something. Now what is this functioning about? Functioning something means doing some task, doing some approach or doing some calculations at the background. So that is what a function is. And in functions, with respect to Excel, we call them as a predefined logics. Now what is the meaning of predefined? Which means they are already being defined with Excel or the Excel interface or the Excel documentation when the Excel was invented, that how a function is to be created, what logic this function is going to calculate, and how the data would be used in the function. So functions are nothing but predefined logics which are used for creating different set of tasks and actions or operations with the data. Now there is something called as formula. Now, how does a function and formula differ from each other? So, when I talk upon a formula, formula is something which is not predefined. It's not already created, or the logic is not pre-written or pre-stored. Here, we create the logic. So, logic is created. According to the task. So the logic over here is created according to the task which we want to do with respect to the data, or according to the operation which we want to do with respect to data. So when I talk upon a function, functions are predefined logics. When I talk upon a formula, formula is something which is not predefined. It's being created manually according to the logic or the task which we want to do. So the next point of difference between a function and a formula is that functions are defined by a name, and that name has a logic stored which is running in the background. So functions are defined by name. So functions are defined by a name, whereas formula is not defined by a name. So formulas are not being defined by a name. So there is no name associated with the formula, because formula is something which we will create according to the data logic. Now functions take arguments, like each function has specific set of values to be considered to make that function execute properly. So each function has specific elements or specific set of values to be considered. So specific set of values to be considered while execution. While executing, this function will ask for specific values. Let's say some might ask for certain range, some might ask for column name, some might ask for the row number, some might ask for the conditions which are there. So these are specific set of values that would be considered by a function. But when I talk upon a formula, Formula is not asking any specific values or specific set of values for execution. As per the logic, the values would be considered for the same. So no specific predefined values are used. No specific predefined values are used for execution. So no define for what? For execution, which is there. So this is what, and functions can be with arguments or without arguments. Means function can run with value or without value, but formula is going to run with value only. So function can run with value or without value. A function can execute with or without any value. But when I talk upon a formula, formula is always going to be executed with a value. So formula is going to be executed with a value. Now, what is the difference? Let's try to see with an example. If I want to find out sum of values, let's say if I want to find out sum of values. So sum of, let's say, cells. I have values in cell E1, E2 and E3. So if I want to find out sum, what I'm going to write over here is sum, that as know that calculations start with equals to. So sum is a name where the logic of summing up the data is being stored, and there will always be a round bracket associated with it. And here I'll write what? E1, E2 and E3. That this cells will be selected and summation would be based on the same. Now, if I talk upon example for this, it would be that if I want to do sum of cells, I have E1, E2 and E3 over here as well. How I can sum up is, I cannot write sum over here because the logic is what I will create it. So I will write what? E1 plus E2 plus E3. So the arithmetic operators are used very vividly into my formulas. So this is what is the difference between a function and a formula. I didn't pass any arithmetic value, I just passed in a name, and with the name it understood that what the values are being passed, I have to calculate their sum. But here I have given a logic that I have to do calculation with respect to E1 plus E2 plus E3 for the set of cells. So here, this is what is the difference between functions and formulas. We have different set of functions and formulas which are being used, and they are helpful for us in terms of understanding and analysis of the data. So understanding formula. What is a formula? Excel formula is an expression that acts on a cell or a range of cells, because this is going to act not only on a specific cell but on all range of cells and produces results in another cells or multiple cells. Now, my formula can generate one outcome, my formula can also generate multiple outcomes for me. So you can perform different calculation easily with the help of Excel formulas. You can add, subtract, multiply, divide and do lots of other calculations with the help of Excel formulas. Now, how to write a formula? Means how a formula needs to be written. So select a cell where you want to write in a formula, and as said, calculation in Excel always start with equals to. So you have to write equals to and always have this note in your mind. That note, formulas in Excel always begins with an equal sign, with a cell or a type of cells which is there in its address in the selected cell. So enter an operator means it's a formula. So you have to write an operator. Operator is nothing but a mathematical or an arithmetic operator in order to do those calculations. For example, subtraction, which I have done over here in the example. So select the next cell or the type of cell address which you want to select in order to do it, and press enter once you have written the formula. The result of the calculation would be available to you in the cell, and the formula would be available to you in the formula bar. So now if you can see with an example which I have shared on the screen, that there is number 1 and there is number 2, and I am finding out the difference. So here I am finding the difference on the basis of formula approach. If you can see that we have number 1 minus number 2. So here in the formula bar we can see the formula which is shown for the same. So this is what a formula is in Excel. So now there are different functions as well. It's not always that we will do those calculations with respect to formulas, but definitely we will take help of something called as functions as well in order to do those tasks. Now what are functions? I have mentioned to you all that functions are nothing but predefined logic or pre-created logics which are used to create certain approaches or certain outcomes in order to calculate and generate analysis for my data. Now, if I go the very basic and the very utmost simplest functions which are available in Excel is nothing but sum. As we know, the sum adds all the numbers in a range of cells. It also allows selection of individual cells instead of full range. It's not like it will always allow from A1 select cells till A10. Not always like that. If you want to select A1, A2 and A10, you can do the selected cells summation as well. So here if you can see with the example, the syntax for sum would be sum range 1, range 2, range 3 or value 1, value 2, value 3. Now, if you can see, you can select a range, you can press specific elements, and then you can generate the outcome for the same. Now, the basic functions like sum, there are few more basic functions such as minimum, maximum, average, as well as the count. These are certain functions which are very simple, very common, and we have explored that when doing different simplest operation with respect to Excel. So, there is a little advanced function which we have in terms of sum. That sum was helping me to sum up all the elements. Let's say someone has worked on different projects. Let's say there is a data related to employees and they have all worked on different projects such as project 1, project 2, project 3 and project 4. The data is available for 100 employees and all 4 employees have worked upon different projects. So if I want to find out the total hours for a particular project, that means if I want to find out the total hours worked by an employee on a particular project, how I would do? Because when I just calculate sum on the project hours, it is going to sum up all the elements which are there. But I don't have any approach of just mentioning a specific element. Let's say I want to select that employee number 1. How many hours he has worked on project 1. Employee number 2. How many hours he has worked on project 2. Employee number 3. How many total hours he has worked on project 3. I don't have that kind of approach to be implemented with my sum. So here I have a criteria. Criteria is nothing but a condition that I want to sum up the data, that is for sure. But this sum up is not specific for all the cells. It is specific for certain specific cells. That if I say that find out the total numbers of hours for project 1, I definitely have a condition where sum of hours needs to be there, but the criteria needs to be mentioned as project 1. So what I will do is I'll use something called as sum if. So sum if is nothing but sum of cells given by specific criteria or condition. So it returns a sum of cells specified by a given condition or criteria. If you can see with the syntax, it has sum if. Sum if means sum the data if the given condition is being satisfied. Now in this given condition, what are the values which are required over here? The first element, the first value which are required for this function to execute smoothly and efficiently is nothing but an range. Now what is a range? Range is something from where I will calculate the values or I will find out my criteria. So let's say I said that I want to sum up the total number of hours for project 1. So definitely all the cells were project related information such as the project name of the column would be selected as my range, because in that range of values I have criteria which I can fetch. So there is range, then there is something called as criteria. Now what is criteria? Criteria is something but a condition needs to be matched. Now from those project column, what I want to match is nothing but project 1. So the criteria over here is from the range of cells, what is the value which I want to filter and then sum of the same. So I want to filter project is equals to 1. That is my criteria. And then there is something called as sum range. Now what is sum range? Sum range is what I want to sum up for project 1. Means for that particular criteria, what is the value which I want to sum it up? I want to sum up the total number of hours worked by the employee. So I will use sum if, where the sum range is the total hours, range is the project column, and the criteria is nothing but the name of the project. So to find the sum of salaries for all hunters, you can see there is an example which I have written where sum if, I'll select the cells where the criteria which being met, modified. So here if you can see the range, and then there is a criteria which is nothing but hunter, and then there is something called as sum values. So ranges would be available for us. So there is a basic definition which is given to us and simplest formula which is mentioned over here. Now there is some ifs as well. It's not only that I can filter out the data based on one specific condition, but there are certain things where I can filter out the data based on not specifically one conditions, but multiple conditions as well. So how will I try to take help of the same? So over there, when you want to sum up the data with respect to not one specific condition, but multiple conditions, you'll use something called as sum ifs, where you can mention multiple criteria to be matched within your data. Now, if you can see, sum range would be coming first into sum if and not the last which was there in sum if. So here, we'll try to understand the same with respect to code, that how does a sum if works. So if you can see my screen, first let's understand how does this basic functions are being implemented over here, and then let's see how this sum if would be implemented over here. So first of all, as I said, I'll give highlight to all the cells, give them border, and then give all borders to this table because it becomes very efficient for me in terms of handling. Now, let's find out and use the basic functions over here. Now, the basic functions which I want to do. So, I have written certain questions over here which we will solve with respect to the data which is available to you. That is, the very first is total insured value. If you can see, there is an insured value column. This is an insurance data, and there are certain policies which are there, which are being took by candidates, and I want to find out certain calculations for the same. So the very first calculation which I want to find out is nothing but the total insured value. Now there is a column known as insured value. How will I find out the total for the same? I'll definitely take help of what? Either function or a formula, because I'm not going to do this manually with a calc sitting in my hand. So what can I do over here is, let's take help of a formula first and then understand how does a function is different from a formula. So equals to is something from where my calculations would start. Now if I go over here, insured value 1, it's a formula, so 2, it's a formula, then it's 3, it's a formula, then it's 4, it's a formula, then it's 5. So only 5 has been selected, but I have lots of cells which are there. So for each selected cell, I have to give a plus symbol over here, the arithmetic operation over here, in order to mention that this is the logic which I want to follow with my data. And definitely this is not a good approach, because how many rows do I have? If I check how many rows do I have, so if I just select over here, Control Shift down arrow key, and over here in the status bar, you can see how many rows do we have? 500. So do we have to select all 500 each time when I am doing calculations and give the logic to all of them? Don't you think so that this is going to be a lot of time consuming process, and still it will be a lot of effort giving process where I have to write the logic on myself and then select each value. So 500 times I have to select the values if I go with the approach of formula. So let's see how the function would help us to do. But before proceeding with function, why can't I select entire thing and do enter? What it is doing? It's not doing anything. It is just taking the value of that cells and copy pasting it over here. If I select the range of cells, because I have not added any logical statements to the set of values. So if I want to find out the sum of them, definitely with the help of formula, something is not being calculated over here. Why? Because it is taking time for me. This, and this step I have to repeat for 500 times. So in order to lower down this efforts and burden which I have to do with this data, let's try to utilize something called as function. So as I am writing sum over here as a function, as said that functions are nothing but predefined logics. So the logics are being always defined with that name. If you could see that when I select this sum, there is adds all the numbers in a range of cells. That's what it is trying to say me. Now there are other functions with respect to sum as well. I will definitely go and hover with them with respect to my down arrow key, and above with respect to my up arrow key. Now if I want to find out sum if, adds a cell specified by a given condition or criteria. If I go below, adds a cell specified by a given set of condition or criteria. When I go below, returns the sum of products and corresponding cells. Now I don't want to do all of them. I just want to simply go with sum. So I have selected this function from here with the help of arrow keys. Remember never to press enter, because if you press this enter, it's incorrect, because function has not got any value and sum is just a name which is being showcased in the output. This name is not having any value to execute, so nothing is being shown. So when you are trying to utilize functions and when you find out this value, but when you press an enter key, that approach goes wrong. You have to ideally press tab key in order to select the function. Now when I press this tab key, can you see certain sections or certain values which it is asking for me? The very first value is nothing but number 1. The second value over here is nothing but number 2, number 3, and so on. If you can see, number 2 is in square brackets. Now what does this square bracket means? It means that it's not mandatory that you pass number 2. You can also pass one value and it can sum up the data. It's not going to give us error. But when I pass sum is equals to any one value, definitely the answer is going to be the same value. So, comma, square brackets, whenever there are square brackets given in any of the function, the argument is asking a square bracket, which means that it's not mandatory. So, over here, what is the function or what is the value which I want to do is so over here, what do I want to do is I want to calculate the total insured value of the total rows which are available to me. So how will I go? I'll definitely not go and select each one of them because it is asking all of them to be selected like this. There are 500 rows as we saw over here. So 500 times I have to select. That's the reason why we were not selecting formula over here. So how a function would help me to do the same is I will go over here and I'll select the entire range. I can drag the cells or I can select the cells with the help of cursor, which we have understood, or I can use the shortcut key, which is nothing but Control Shift and right arrow key to select all the regions till where I want to stop. And it's a simple function, basic function. I can directly enter even without closing the bracket. But if it was something function where it is asking more than only the cells, then bracket needs to be closed. So here, for a safer side, let's close the bracket and then enter. And you can see the sum of values is being calculated. But you can see that there is hash being showcased, which people think that it's an error, but it's not. We actually have a value being calculated, but it's not being fitting into the column width. So I can adjust the column width over here and you can see the total value is being calculated for the particular column. This is how a function can work and this is how a simple calculation could be performed. So as we see that we have calculated the total insured value which was asked for us to be calculated for the 500 records which were available. Now as you see that for sum, the function which we used, we can select the range of cells or we can select the specific cells in order to find out the specific cell calculations which we want to do. If you want to see over here, you can just observe it. Let me delete it off and I can do sum. Let's say someone is asking me to select only first, then comma, second, this one, comma, and then this. So there are 3 cells selected and it's possible to select certain specific cell and run the sum function over here. So when I click enter, you can see the summation which has been calculated is based on all those cells. Now you can see in the cell, we can see the value. But in the formula section, the formula bar is available to us. Now, how I can interpret and make and modify the changes into formula or the function which I have mentioned. I can double click over here on the cells where the formula is being available. So wherever I double click, my cursor would be incorporated over here in order to insert certain values. So here if you can see enter, if I double click on the same, you can see over here this cursor has been added. Now I want to add a cursor at the end. So for that we have F2 as a function key to add your cursor at the end. Now as said that function keys F1, F2, F3 keys which are available into laptops, for some of them it's directly accessible. So if I click F2 on my system, it's helping me to lower down the volume over here because it has certain other function associated. So I have Fn key which will help us to utilize the F2 key as a function which we want to use. So Fn and F2. So when I do Fn, F2, for some of them F2 can directly work. For some with Fn, that is a function key in your keyboard, F2 key would be associated. So here you can see when I press F2, wherever I keep my cursor within the cell, the cursor or the instructions or the value changes part or the addition of the cursor will be added at the end. So here you can see, if I double click on the cell, so wherever I double click at that particular moment or at that particular location, the cursor would be added. So I'll do this. Now what I want to do is I want to calculate the average insured value. Definitely finding the average, we need to find out sum upon the total number of observations, because average is nothing but sum of all observations upon total number of observations. So sum of all observation is this, and total number of observation is what? 100 for me. So can we do with the help of formula over here? Yes, we could do. So let me take the sum which is being calculated in this cell, divide. So the division symbol is given by this. And divide by what? I know how many cells do I have. I have 500 cells. So I've mentioned this 500, and you can see the average insured value which is being calculated from here. But the approach which I used in order to find out the average was not with respect to function, but was with respect to formula. So this is how a formula is implemented over here. First, the total which was being there, I have selected that, and I have divided by the total number of observations which I have, because average is nothing but sum of all observations upon total number of observations. So this is how the average is being calculated, but I don't want the average to be calculated this way. So how will I do it is, I have a function known as average, which is used to find out the average of the range of values which I have. Average is nothing but the mean. So let me press a tab key, and you can see the number 1, number 2 which is being selected. So this is number 1, comma, this is number 2, comma, this is number 3, and proceeding there are certain numbers. So if I just select specific numbers, for only those specific numbers, the average would be calculated. So here if you see, the average is calculated only for those specific numbers. But do I want for those specific numbers? The answer is no. I want for all the cells, the average insured value. So what I am going to do over here is, I'll delete this and I'll write equals to, and I'll write a function. When I'm using average as a function, definitely I am not going to use and utilize any logical operators or any operators as such in order to utilize a mathematical approach with respect to average. I just have to select the cells and I have to close the bracket and enter. You can see that the average value for that particular part is being calculated for us. So this is how we have got the average of the insured values, and if you want to compare with it that what we have got, is it correct or not, let me do Control Shift and down arrow key. You can see this, the status bar, which is helping me to see that the quick calculations or the quick analysis of the selected cells would be shown. So here it's an average cell which I have, so 4964,411, and if I compare with the average which is being calculated, it's correct. And if you can see the sum value which is being calculated for the same, so this will be available for us over here. Now I want to find out the minimum insured value. So what's the minimum insured value? I'll give minimum, and over here I'll find out Control Shift and down arrow key, enter. So if you can see, the minimum insured value is what? It's 30,000. And if I go and find out max, it's still the same, that I'll consider over here and I do enter. You can find out what the maximum insured value is this. So this is how we have done certain basic calculations such as sum, average, min and max, where we didn't approach any complicated approaches with respect to data or functions. The functions were very simplified, that we just have to select the range of cells and use the function, and the function will automatically understand that what it has to do with the selected range of cells. So this is what is all about basics of functions, the very basics functions which we do have. Now, as said that we did had functions related to what? Related to finding out the sum, but with certain criterias or conditions. As we understood that there was something called as sum if. So similarly, there is something called as average if as well. So if you can see, as there was something called as sum if, there is something called as count if and count ifs. There is something called as minimum, maximum, average, which we do calculate it, count. So there are certain questions which I want to solve, and I want to explain you that how these functions are being executed and how they are working for the same. So the very first question which we will solve with respect to the data which we have, that is, what is the total sum of insured value for each location? Which means for each location which is available into my table, I want to find out the insured value for it. Now, how I would do it is, definitely I'll go and first understand my data and solve it according to the question which is asked, that find out the total insured value for each location which is available to us. Let me first format it. Hold. Now this value, it's not error, it's hidden. It's not an error, it's hidden. So I'll increase the width of it, and here Control Shift and right arrow key. I'll give this color, I'll make them bold, I'll make them center aligned, and this is how it looks. So here if you see, this is the data which is available to me, the same data which I used for the basic functions. The question is, find out the total insured value, for each location. So what locations do you think? So I have urban location and I have something called as rural location. Is there any other location which is available to me? I don't think so that there is any other location available to me. So I have urban location and I have rural location. So here I will have something called as sum if. Why I am implementing sum if and why not sum? First of all, sum is going to calculate all the values from the selected range of cells. It is not calculating according to the specific criteria or condition. But as per the question which is asked to me, it has said that I want to find out the total insured values for each location, which means location is acting as a criteria for me. The location could be urban, the location could also be rural. So the location is acting as a criteria for me and I have to accordingly solve this answer. So here I cannot use sum. Why I cannot use sum is, I do equals to and I do sum, tab key, and when I do this, so I'll write Control Shift and down arrow key, and you can see what it is showing me, that it's the total sum value which is being shown. But I don't want the sum for all the values. I want the sum for a specific location. Let's say if I write urban over here, it should show me the total insured value for urban. If there is rural mentioned over here, it should show me the total insured value for rural. So I cannot use sum. I have a criteria on the basis of what the summation needs to be done. So I will use something called as sum, but not the sum where it is finding summation of all the rows. I'll use something called as sum if, where it is finding out the summation of only those rows if the particular criteria is being met. So understand that adds a cell specified by a given condition or criteria, which means according to the given condition or criteria, the cells would be added. Now, if I want to select these functions, there is down arrow key, up arrow key, which will help me to hover within those functions which are matching this pattern. If I want to select SUMIF from there, I definitely press something called as a tab key. Now tab key is asking me three things, as I have written over here as well, that SUMIF asks three things. First is range, second is criteria, and the third is sum range. Now what are this? As said, range. Range is the range of values from where I want to filter or find the criteria. So what do you think so that from where I would like to filter or find the criteria upon? As my criteria is based on location. So definitely the range of values would be what? Location. Why? Because my criteria over there is nothing but location. So I'll go over here and I'll do Control Shift and down arrow key. So this is a cell which is being selected and this is nothing but the range. A range of cells which is being selected. You can see range is being selected and I do comma. Now what it is next asking for, you can always understand when you use function that what is the next value which your function is expecting. What is the next value which your function is expecting? Nothing but criteria. Now what's the criteria? Now I know that the location is urban or rural. So I will write a criteria that quotes. Now remember, these are quotes. Whenever you want to write something apart from numbers, you will definitely write it into quotes. We have single quotes and double quotes, but in Excel, it's preferred to be using double quotes, not the single one. This one is not so much preferably used, but double quotes could be used very preferably, very efficiently. So when I write quotes urban, so that's the location which I want to find out. That sum if C22, that particular C22, C501 to that particular range of cells, find what? Find urban, comma. So what does this do? That from the range of cells which are selected, urban as a criteria would be found. Now when I just write urban, it is equals to urban, which means in the range of cells, wherever the values is equals to urban, select that cells or select that rows. So that rows would be selected and for those rows only the sum would be calculated. So what is the sum range which it is asking for? It's not mandate as such. So let's close it off and let's see what it is giving me. If I close it off and I see, it's giving me what? 0. So I'll go and find out what sum range. If I don't have sum range, it is giving me what? 0. So I'll go over here, the sum ranges, I want to find the summation of insured values. So I'll go and do Control Shift and down arrow key and do enter. So when I do enter, you can see that the sum of values is being found. But it's not for all of them. It's for what? It's for urban as a location. If I do Control Shift and down arrow key, you can see the summation value which is found over here and the summation value which is found over here is different. Why? Because it has not summed all of them. It has summed only those locations where the location is urban. So definitely this is there. What if I want to find, I'll write rural over here and the value should show me for rural. So what should I do? Definitely I'll go into my function where instead of urban, I'll write what? Rural. And this is how it looks. That rural is being filtered like this. For rural, this is a value and for urban, that was the value. But what if when I am changing urban over here, the value must change. I don't want me to be going manually into the function which I have used and changing the values. I want whenever I mention urban over here, the insured value should filter accordingly. Whenever I use rural over here, the insured value should show out the summations accordingly. So what I can do is, I can go over here, instead of rural, which is being selected as a static value. Now what's a static value? Which means it's a fixed value which is being set. I'll select a cell where I know these values are going to be changeable. So I've selected this cell and I do enter. So here if you can see, when I mention rural, you can see the summation of the data changing. When I mention urban, the summation of the data is not there because the spelling of urban is 0. It's not able to find something like this where it is finding a match. So urban is not there, rural is there. Let's write rural and you can see for rural the data is there. Now case sensitivity is not an issue. Now what's in case sensitivity? That you write it in uppercase, lowercase, it's still fine. It's not going to be an issue for us. But writing the name correct of the criteria needs to be there, or it's mandatory as such over here. So urban, if I find out rural, you can see for rural it is being changing. So this is how sum if work, where it is not finding the sum of all the values, it is finding the sum of only the specific values. If I need to repeat this function again, how should I write it? Is equals to, then there is something called as sum if. What it is telling me? Select the range of cells from where you will find the criteria. What is the range of cells where I will find the criteria? That is nothing but location. So from this range of cells, I am going to find out the criteria. Now what is the criteria which I want to match within my data? That is urban. Urban is a criteria which I want to match. But if I just write urban directly, whenever this function is running, it is obviously going to calculate and do these changes only for urban region or urban location. But what about rural location? The data is available for that as well. So I need to put manually the rural, but I don't want to. So first of all, let me write down the sum range. So here if you can see, in this, instead of urban, what I can do is I can select this cell where this urban and rural as a value is changing. So when the change is happening, the same change can occur in the condition within the formula. So here I'll select this. So this value is being selected and enter, and when I do urban, you can see the value is changing. If I do semi-rural, now there is no such criteria like this, and you can see it is showing me what? 0. Because sum of that condition is ideally what? 0 for me. So this is how sum if works. So it is not summing all the values, it is summing only if the given condition or criteria is being met. So I hope this is clear. So as we have seen over here that we understood that how we can calculate the sum of the data, but not for all the cells. I am calculating the sum only for specific cells or only according to the criteria which is there. That is the meaning of what? Sum if. That if a particular criteria is being mentioned or if a particular criteria is being satisfied, then and only there this condition would be followed and this would be able to filter out the data and find out the summation for the same. So that was sum if. Now sum if is taking only one condition and filtering the data based on one condition. But let's say someone says me that where you are filtering the data on the basis of location, also filter on the basis of region. So now as I want to find out the sum of insured value for location as urban but the region as east. I know that how I can find out for the location as urban, but how I will be able to find out for the location as east. So let's try to understand over here. So if you go with respect to the questions which I have shared over here, so you can see that what is the total sum of insured value for each combination of location and region. That's what the question is. That I want to find out the sum of insured value, that is for sure. That sum is what we implemented over here. But here there is a criteria. Now it's not only location as a criteria, but then there is something called as region being added into this criteria. So how I will be solving this? So if I went into my sheet and here there is a criteria. Let's say I enter location as urban and the region as east. I want to know the sum of insured value over here. So what I want to know is insured value or total insured value. Total insured value for the same. This is what I want to know. Here, I want this format to be implemented over here as well. So what I can do is, I'll select this cell. I will not sit and create the formula again and again or format again and again. If I want to format the same thing to the next cells, I can go and select format painter from the clipboard. When I select format painter from the clipboard, the format would be copied. And when I paste over here, the same format which was being selected is being pasted over here. So I'll make this bold. So what I have to do is I have to calculate the total insured value with respect to location as well as a region. So how I would do it? First of all, I need the summation of this. So sum of this would be calculated. Based on what? Based on first criteria is nothing but the location, and the second criteria which I want to satisfy is nothing but the region. So how we will do it? First of all, sum if would never be useful. Why? Because sum if can only filter out the data based on one criteria. Because it's if. If means singular criteria would be considered over here. What if I want to filter out on the basis of multiple criteria which are available? So how I would do it is, I will utilize something called as sum ifs. I utilize something called as sum ifs. Now what does sum if say? If you understand what does sum if say, adds the cell specified by a given set of condition. The meaning of set of means multiple. If I just check sum if you see, adds the cell specified by a given condition. By a means single and set means multiple. So adds a cell specified by a given set of condition or criteria. So I will take sum ifs, and what it is asking for. Let's see, when I was taking sum if, it was asking me range, criteria and sum range. But when I am talking upon sum ifs, it is asking me sum range first, which means what do I want to sum up? I will give the data or pass the data into this function accordingly to what it is asking me. So what is the first value which is being asked to me? That is sum range. Now I'll go over here and I'll select, because I want to find out the summation of this. So this is my sum range, comma. Now there are criterias or the conditions which I have. If you see the sum if, what were the values? We had range. Range is nothing but the values from where the criteria would be selected. Then what criteria I want to filter out from the range. And then we have something called as sum range. But here, the first thing which it is asking for is sum range, which we have selected. Now there is something called as criteria range 1. Now what does that mean? Means the first criteria or the first condition would be fetched from which list of values or from which set of values. So if you see, my first criteria is what? Urban as a location. So it will be fetched from which particular range of cells? This. So this becomes criteria range 1. That from this range of cells, find what? Find urban to me. So this has become my criteria range 1, comma. Here if you see, then it is asking for from this range of cells, what do I want to compare? That what do I want to filter, or what do I want to fetch, or what do I want to relate or find out the exact element from those cells of values. What do I want to find out is urban. I can definitely write urban, but if I write, what is an issue which is going to come is every time when I am changing the value in the location, I have to change the value into my function as well. Because when I just mention a static value into the function, it is going to give the same outcome every time. So if I write urban and I close it. Now see why I am closing it. There is a square bracket for criteria range 2. What does that means? That it's not mandatory that you give a criteria range 2. Even without giving a criteria range 2 means even with one criteria or one condition, some ifs can work. So here you can see that this is filtering out for urban. Now if I write urban, let's compare over here in sum. I have written urban and the same value is being copied. If I want this format to be copied over here, so I'll take format painter and I'll copy the format, and you can see the same value is shown. But some if can only take one condition, and that's what we have given over here. But what if it is asking ki take insured value for location as east in the urban, where region as east in the urban location. So what I am going to do is urban, I will mention comma. Now criteria range 2. Now what is a criteria range 2? Criteria range 2 is nothing but the second condition from where it would be satisfied. So the second criteria would be satisfied from this column. So I'll take Control Shift and down arrow key. So this is what it is selected, that from this range of cells I'm going to select the second criteria which is available. Now what's my second criteria is nothing but the region as east. So if I write comma and if I go to the formula function where I am writing it, you can see sum range is done, criteria range is done, criteria range 1 is done, criteria is done, criteria range 2, and criteria needs to be mentioned. What's the criteria which I want to find out from here is nothing but east. So you can see for urban location, east region, what is the sum insured value which we have got. This is the total sum insured value which we have gathered. What if I want to find out for the west region? Is it changing dynamically? No. Why? The reason is we have used specific value over here instead of selecting cells where the values are dynamically changing. So instead of urban, what I am going to do is I'll select this cell from where I can change urban to rural or rural to any other condition, and that would be considered into my function as a value to be compared into the criteria. And from here as well, when there is east, I'll select from here. Now let's say west is being selected. So in that cell, the region can be anything east, west, north, south, and that would be selected, and that would be added as a criteria into my data when the function is being executed in order to filter it out and give the required outcome. So when I do enter, you can see urban and west. It's showing me 0, which means urban and west as a region is not there. Let's say we have Midwest. Let's understand that urban and Midwest is possible. So Midwest, and you can see yes, there is a range which is being followed. Now for rural and Midwest, what is the total insured value? You can see for the rural region and the Midwest criteria, this is the total insured value which we have. Now similarly, if I want to find out for east, can you find out for east? Yes. And rural, if I don't give anything which is not available, let's say semi-rural is something which is not available to me. So if I find it out, what it is giving me 0, because semi-rural as a criteria is not available in location, and region as east is there. But semi-rural and east is what we were expecting, but it's not found. So the answer is what? 0. So I hope this sum ifs is understood to you all. This is how sum ifs work, that we are able to find out the summation of data based on one or multiple criteria. Now, what is the difference between sum and sum if? Sum if and sum ifs. And which one is preferable at what condition? Let's understand the very first thing, that is nothing but sum. Now, what is the meaning of sum? Sum means addition of all the selected cells or all the cells in a range. So, when you do sum, it's taking all the cells. There is no criteria, there is no condition which is being followed. So, by default, all the cells are being calculated and the total of all the cells is being given out. And the total of all the cells is given out. Now, when I talk upon sum if, what it does is, it will sum up the data, that is for sure, but there will be one condition. Now, if is a singular word. So, if means one condition would definitely be there as a part of my data. That's sum if. That is, if means one criteria would be followed. But what if someone asked me to filter the data based on multiple conditions? As it was shown over here, that I want to filter the data on the basis of location as well as region and then find out the sum the value. I cannot do with sum if, because it's a single condition taking data or a criteria part. So I will take help of something called as sum ifs. Now what does sum ifs do? Sum ifs take multiple conditions or multiple criteria at once. It can take one criteria as a minimum, or it can take n number of criteria as max in order to find out the summations based on the data. Now there are certain versions in certain office laptops or Excel versions where sum if is not being utilized a lot, where people use sum ifs to filter out the data based on one condition as well as on the basis of multiple conditions as well. So this is the difference between sum if and sum ifs. We have one more question to solve with respect to sum if. Let's try to understand that. Now, if you see, the question which was there with us is, what is the total sum of insured value for all the records with an expiry date prior to May 21? Which means we have date related operation. Prior means before. Before obviously means that the date would be less than the May wala date which is there. So what it is asking is, what is the total sum of insured value? Means I want to find out the sum for all records, means on the basis of all records with an expiry date prior to May 2021. So with the criteria that expiry date of the policy of the insurance is before or prior. Prior means before May 2021. So let's try to understand that at before May, how many insured values were there. So if I go over here and go into my Excel, so here if you see, I have written a date as such over here, that is, if you can see, May 01, 2021. And here I will find the sum. Now what do I want to do? I want to find the sum. Now as it is said before May, that is prior May. So is there any expiry date? Let's see first. Is there any expiry date? Yes. We can see that yes, there is an expiry date column available at our end. There is January, February, March and so on. So I want to calculate only for the data which is before what? May. Means before this value, I want to calculate the rows of all of them. So how would I do it? Obviously, I'm not going to do it manually, because manually I have to go to each and every row and type in the value till the condition is not mentioned or satisfied, or I get the row where the condition is being satisfied. Now, what it is telling me that I want to find out prior. Prior is always date. With respect to date as an option, when you are filtering with respect to date, prior means before, and before means less than. After means greater, and after means greater than, which is there. So it's asking me to find out the sum of values. Prior means before May. So I'll write sum if, because it's one condition which is there. What's the range from where I will select this date as May 2021? Obviously the expiry wala column which is there. So I'll take Control Shift and down arrow key. Now what is the criteria, or what is the date value which is being mentioned over here is, this is a range. From here, what do I want to find is criteria which is less than May 2021, that is prior to May 2021. So how greater than, less than would be added into a criteria? Because as of now, till now we have seen equals to means location equals to urban, location region equals to east, but we have not seen less than, greater than, and so on operations. So let's try to understand how does less than, greater than, and so on operations work. So according to the question which we have to solve over here is that what is the total sum of insured value for all records with the expiry date prior to May 2021. Obviously that we have a data where we have to calculate the sum over here, but with respect to sum, we do have to calculate something such as greater than, less than, and so on. So, in order to find out the sum of all records where the criteria is greater, less than, or prior to May 2021, we would do is sum if. Why I'm using sum if over here is because I have the range of cells, and for those range of cells, I want one criteria to be maintained. And what is the criteria which is to be maintained is nothing but the expiry date of the insurance policy must be less than or prior to May 2021. So, first of all, one thing which my sum if would ask is nothing but the range. Range is a series of values from where this criteria would be satisfied. So, I'll select the range over here, and this is the range of the cells which is being selected, and I'll write comma. What is the criteria which I need to do? Now the criteria is date prior to May 2021. We know that we have used criteria over here such as location is equals to urban, location is equals to urban, region is equals to east, or location is equals to rural. So equals to operators are being used, but we have never used operations such as greater than, less than, equals to, not equals to in order to fetch or filter the records with respect to sum in my criteria value. So we'll try to see over here when it is said that expiry date must be prior to May 2021, which means prior is less than May 2021. So less than May 2021 means I have to give a symbol of less than. So this is a less than icon which I will give. Now less than what date is I am planning to filter out the data with is May. So I'll write 01 May 2021. So this criteria states that the condition would be filtered for that data where the date is before May 2021. So here one before 1st May 2021 is what it would be filtering it out. So my range is clear over here. My criteria is this, less than. Whenever you have to give less than, greater than, equals to, not equals to symbol, you will definitely give it into quotes. Now after giving that, we have something called as sum range. Now what is a sum range? What I want to sum up. Now I'm using sum if, so sum range comes at the end. So I want to find out the summation of all the insured values. I've selected it and I have pressed enter. And you can see before May or prior to May 2021, what was the total insured value which we have got? This is the total insured value which we have calculated and extracted from my data. Now, less than, equals to, less than, equals to, not equals to, greater than, equals to, and so on operations are definitely used into the criteria part, but we have to mention it into strings. Let's say if I want that the values must be greater than this particular value, or let's say 3000, 4000 or 8000, definitely I'll give this criteria into quotes greater than and the numeric value. Even though there is a numeric value, I'll mention it into quotes whenever there is greater than, less than, not equals to symbols which are used. So, this is what we have seen, that the data or the value is being calculated before May 2021. So, I'm applying a format painter over here which will format the values from the above cell to the below cell. So, same format would be copied. So, if we go according to the questions which were asked to us with respect to data, we have tried to solve the three of them. Now, all three of them were associated with finding out the summation. Now, one was with respect to sum if, with respect to a particular equals to category or criteria. Another was with some ifs where there were multiple conditions to be filtered. And the third one was sum if, that is one criteria was mentioned, but a less than, greater than or equals to symbolic factor was used. So this is how sum if works, and some ifs are being useful for us in terms of analysis. So we have tried to solve the first three. Now let's understand the fourth question which is based on the same data, and let's see what it is trying to ask me for. So how many records exist where the business type is classified as retail, which means I want to count how many rows, how many records. How many means it's asking for the count. How many records exist means are available where the business type is classified as retail, means where the business type of the data is retail. So definitely when I want to count the number of rows, I definitely use something called as count. But count with what? I have to use count with a specific criteria known as retail. So what I'll use over here is, let's try to see. So here if you see, I've made a section. What it is asking me, that I want to count the number of records which are available where the value is retail. So the count if is very simple. You have to use count if. So there is something called as count if and ifs. The working is same, that if means it will take one particular criteria, ifs will take multiple criteria which are there. So I'll take if. So count if. Count the number of cells within a range that meet the given condition, which means it meets the given condition which is there. So I'll press a tab key. What is there? I'll take range. Now there is no sum range, average range taken into consideration over here. Why? Because it is just finding the count. So from the range of cells where the criteria is being satisfied, that cells count would be took over here. So how we can see is, I'm going in count if. Count if may what it is asking me, that go in business type. So here if you can see, I'm going into business type. So that's a range. So from this range of cells, what do I want to filter out is nothing but something called as retail. So you can see in my formula bar that this is what I am asking for. And count if only takes two parameters. The very first is the range of cells, means from where I'm going to filter out the condition, and the second is the retail. Let me make this clear again, that there is no sum range, there is no average range with respect to count, because wherever this condition is matched, it is only counting the rows. So as per the question, how many rows are satisfying this condition? This is what I want to find. So I am utilizing a COUNTIF function over here. So when I do this, how many rows are belonging to retail sector for me? There are 25 rows where the business type is what is retail. Now, if I want to see where the business type is apartment, definitely it is going to show me 25 over here. What is the reason that it is showing me 25? Because if you see the function, the value which is used in the criteria, it's a static value, means it's a direct value given. It's a fixed value which is being took. There is no cell being referred over here. So if I refer a cell, so whatever value is being used into the cell, that would be utilized over here. So let's say I take this and do this. So here if you see, if I say that business type is apartment, then the insured values, or not the insured values, let's say I'll write total records. So how many total records are available for the business type as apartment? 169. If I say that the business type is farming, how many total are there? 117. If I say the business type is, let's say, medical, so what are the total records available for me? 2. So this is how I'm counting a record based on a specific criteria or a specific condition, that is the business type is equals to retail. I can change dynamically by not passing the static value into the formula or the function which I am using, but passing in a dynamic cell where the values will repeatedly change. This is how we do in terms of COUNTIF. So this is how we are going to solve this question, where I want to find out how many rows are satisfying the condition where the business type of the insurance is nothing but retail. Now, when I go over here and understand from the next one what it is, that the next question is, how many records are there where the region is East? Means I want to find how many records are there where the region is East and the date is after July 2021. As mentioned now, I mentioned the same, that when there is before or prior, a less than factor would be considered. When there is after with respect to date, a greater than factor would be considered. So if you see the question over here, how many records are there where the region is East? So the first criteria which I want to find is region is equals to East and the date is after July 2021. So which date do we have? We have expiry date is after July 2021. So we have to see expiry date after July 2021, that is nothing but greater than July 2021. So what I would like to do is, I like to filter it out. Now if you see, it is asking me how many records. Now the meaning of how many records means I'm just wanting or willing to find out the count of the records based on these two criteria or based on these two conditions. So let me go and write this within my data. So what it is asking me, that I want to find out count, but I cannot use directly count because only count is helping me to count the number of rows. I want something called as count if. But if I use count if, I would be able to only give one condition. But what if I'm asking to give multiple conditions? I'm asked to give multiple conditions over here. So I will not use count if, I'll use count ifs. You can see, counts the number of cells specified by a given set of condition. Wherever there is set means one or many. So ifs, and here if I press a tab key, this would be used. So here you can see criteria range 1, that is the condition 1 would be available in which range of cells. So the condition 1 is nothing but East. So I'll go in this region and I'll select it. What is the condition 1 which I will like to give is nothing but East. So if I give only one condition, is it able to solve it out? Yes. It's able to solve it out. Why? Because count ifs can take one or more than one condition over here. So if I use count ifs and do this operation, let's say according to the first condition, I'll go in region, comma, what is the factor which I want? That it is east. And what is the next factor which I do want over here is nothing but the expiry date greater than. Greater than means after. So I'll take Control Shift L, the expiry date, and I give a condition. Now for less than or prior, we have a less than condition. For greater than, we have a greater than. So greater than this, so greater than what? Greater than July. So not 1st July, let's say 31st July 21 or 2021 is something which I want to filter it out. And you can see how many rows are after that. I didn't consider 1 July over here because it's asking greater than July. So I cannot consider 1 July over here. So it took 31st July 21. So I cannot consider 1 July. The reason being, because if I say 1 July, to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that rows will also be there. I am asking greater than July. So last day of July, let's say I've considered 31st July 2021. So after that, how many rows are satisfying that particular condition is what I want to check. So after that, 173 rows are satisfying the condition where the region is east and the date is after July 2021. So this is what we have solved with respect to count ifs. And this is how count ifs will help you to count the data based on one particular category or multiple categories which we have, or multiple criteria which we have with our data. So I hope this is clear with you all in terms of understanding what is count if and how does count if work in terms of a real world analysis. Now the next question which has been passed to us is nothing but related to what is the average insured value for records where the state is New York. Now they're asking me that what is an average value, average insurance value or insured value which is available for a state of New York. Now let's first see that is state related operations available to me. So if you go over here in this data, yes, the state related operation is available to me, New York, so NY is what I want to filter my data upon. So there are multiple symbols which are available to us in terms of data, and I definitely want to find out the average insured value for the individual or for the people or for the records where the value is or where the state value is New York. So here, as they are asking me to find out the average, but average would be associated with if, because I don't want to find out the average of all the records, I want to find out the average of the specific records where the state is New York. So I'll do average if. Now in this average if, what do I want to do? First is nothing but the range. So I'll do Control Shift and L. So in this range of cells is what you want to go. So range, and here you can see criteria is something which is same, which was there in sum if, right? You can see over here average if, it takes average if, range, criteria and average range. So what's the criteria which I have? I can select the cells where I am writing New York, NY. So, or I can write it manually into double quotes. Now what it is asking me? Average value. Instead of some value, if you can see, instead of some range, average if is asking me what? Average range. So what values or which values average do I want to calculate as insured value? So I'll select this cells. Just a second. 24. Control Shift and down arrow key. And then when I enter, you can see the average insured value for the state as New York is this. I can do a format painter over here. I'll copy it and I'll paste it. So you can see a format painter has been added. So for New York, this is this. Let's say OH, Ohio. This is what it is changing. And you can see the dynamic change is being visible to us. Let's say NG. You can see this values, the average insured value is changing. So this is how I can calculate the average of the data based on the specific criteria or the condition which is there. Now, let's understand and observe the next question which is there with us. What is the next question which we do have? That what is the average insured value for records where the region is East? And the business type starts with letter O. Now this is something different. Where I know I want to find out the average insured value for records in the region as East, which means the region of the data must be East. But see, what is the business type starts with the letter O? Do I know an exact value that what would be used? I don't know that O is particularly element in my data. Or what are certain values which are available in terms of businesses starting with O. So how I will able to filter out or fetch out those kind of records and find out the average for the same. So let's try to understand them. So if I go over here, you can see that there is something called as average ifs. Now, average ifs means it will find out the average based on not specifically one condition, but also multiple conditions as well. If will take only one. Ifs will take one or more than one. So, here if you see, I want what? Average ifs, not if. Now, average range. Now, what they are asking me that I want to find out the average. Average of what? Average of the insured values. So, which range of values I want to use in terms of calculating the average is this. So, average range, comma, criteria range 1. So, what is mentioned in the question that I want to find the average insured value where the region is East. So, I go, the first criteria is what? Where the region is equals to what? East for me. So, I have written this. Now, the next criteria where the business type starts with O. So, if I go in business type as a column, what do you think? So, O is office building, then there is other which is being mentioned, then there is something called as organization. So, there are lots of values which are starting with what? O. Do I know an exact term? No. I just know a pattern. When I know a pattern that it starts with O, how to filter out those kind of records? So, the next criteria which it is asking for is criteria range 2. So, we'll go in this, that is business type, Control Shift, down arrow key and then comma. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to filter out where the business type of the particular records is nothing but starting with O. I don't know the exact value, I just know it starts with O. Whenever you know data like this, where you write quotes, now see this carefully that you will write quotes, you will write O, that it starts with O. Let me give a capital O over here. So, it starts with O and give a asterisk, that is star. So, after O, there could be n number of elements which can come along. So, this star means it starts with O, but after O, you don't know how many characters or how many letters or how many alphabets are being part of it. So, this is how you write. If someone says that there should be O somewhere in between the type, so you will write star, O and star. So it states that O is somewhere in between. But as per the question, what it has asked, that the criteria where the business type starts with O. So in quotes, you can write starts with O, and I don't know how many characters after O is there. So I'll write star, this, and I enter, and you can see where the region is east and the starts with O, this is how it is there. So this is what we have tried to solve based on the questions which were asked to us with respect to data, and we were trying to explain and understand that what is sum ifs, what is average ifs, what is average if, and what is average if, and similarly the count and its if statements. So this is all about the sum and its if related operation. So I hope this is understandable.
Like this video, subscribe to our channel and comment on the concept you want to learn next.